Good evening, saints.
Good evening.
Get down with me to 1 Kings chapter 2. We have a few verses to finish up here in chapter 2. So let's pick up our reading in verse 26. And we'll read through verse 46. I'll read the first few verses here. 1 Kings chapter 2, I'll pick up reading in verse 26. Then to Abiathar the priest, the king said, "Go to Anathoth to your own field, for you deserve to die. But I will not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of the Lord Yahweh before my father David, and because you were afflicted in everything with which my father was afflicted." So Solomon dismissed Abiathar from being priest to Yahweh in order to fulfill the word of Yahweh, which he had spoken concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh. Verse 28. Now the news came to Joab, for Joab had followed Adonijah, although he had not followed Absalom. And Joab fled to the tent of Yahweh and took hold of the horns of the altar. It was told King Solomon that Joab had fled to the tent of Yahweh, and behold, he is beside the altar. Then Solomon sent Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, saying, "Go, fall upon him." So Benaiah came to the tent of Yahweh and said to him, "Thus the king has said, come out." But he said, "No, for I will die here." And Benaiah brought the king word again, saying, "Thus spoke Joab, and thus he answered me." The king said to him, "Do as he has spoken, and fall upon him and bury him, that you may remove from me and from my father's house the blood which Joab shed without cause. Yahweh will return his blood on his own head, because he fell upon two men more righteous and better than he, and killed them with the sword, while my father David did not know it. Abner the son of Ner, commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa the son of Jether, commander of the army of Judah. So shall their blood return on the head of Joab and on the head of his descendants forever. But to David and to his descendants and his house and his throne may there be peace from Yahweh forever." Verse 34.
So Benaiah the son of Jehoiada went up and fell upon him and slew him, and he was buried in his own house in the wilderness.
The king appointed Benaiah the son of Jehoiada over the army in Joab's place, and appointed Zadok the priest in place of Abiathar.
Now the king sent to call for Shimei, and said to him, "Build yourself a house in Jerusalem, live there, and do not go out from there to any place."
For on the day you go out and cross the brook Kidron, know for certain that you shall die. Your blood shall be on your own head.
And Shimei said unto the king, "The saying is good. As my lord the king hath said, so will thy servant do." And Shimei dwelt in Jerusalem many days.
And it came to pass at the end of 3 years, that two of the servants of Shimei ran away unto Achish, son of Maacah, king of Gath. And they told Shimei, saying, "Behold, thy servants be in Gath."
Then Shimei arose and saddled his donkey and went to Gath to Achish to look for his servants. And Shimei went and brought his servants from Gath.
And Solomon was told that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and had come back.
So the king sent and called for Shimei, and said to him, "Did I not make you swear by the Lord and Solomon the Lord, saying, you will know for certain that on the day you depart and go anywhere, you will surely die? You said to me, the word which I have heard is good."
While
The king also said to Shimei, "You know in your own heart all the harm that you did to David my father. So Yahweh will bring back your harm on your own head."
But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever.
So the king commanded Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, which went out and fell upon him, that he died. And the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon.
Good. All right. Thank you, saints. Now, there is a series at the end of chapter 2, from verse 19 onwards, of 3 executions. So, what we see here, 3 executions and a dismissal, and what we are watching is Solomon putting the house into order. David has passed on, and the house of David has passed into the hands of Solomon. What we are witnessing in the actions Solomon undertakes here is we are seeing that Solomon is not allowing those who could be potential troublemakers to remain. So in a sense, keeping with the analogy of the things that we have been studying, Solomon is ridding his new garden of possible snakes. He is removing the serpents. Sometimes he is crushing them underfoot, sometimes he is casting them out. And we are watching the beginning of the house of David. Now, in the long-term trajectory, the house will not reach what God fully intended for it. All the promises that God gave to David in 2 Samuel chapter 7 will not be accomplished in Solomon's lifetime or in the lifetime of any of the descendants of David or of Solomon. But what we are watching is Solomon begin well. So the beginning of the house of David, the days are good. In fact, the days at the beginning of Solomon's reign are better than the days of David. In the days of David, Israel was constantly at war. What was the reason God said to David that he wouldn't build his house?
Because his hands were bloody.
That's right. You're a man of blood, right? Bloody hands. Solomon's days are marked by a peaceful prosperity. They were more peaceful and more conquering of the nations around them with less war. So Solomon had a greater kingdom than David. But after Solomon passes from the scene, the house goes on a quick decline, and it gets worse and worse till the house of David is fallen, and the people of Israel are taken captive and scattered into the surrounding nations. In fact, they lose the blessing of the possession of the land. They're cast out from the land, so they're no longer inhabitants of the land that God promised to them. But here in the opening chapters, we're watching what a successful ruling house of David looks like. So while we know it's not going to last, we're going to pay attention to, in these chapters, the things which make for a successful, glorious house. So let's examine some of these details. We quickly, at the end of last week, looked at the conclusion of the life of Adonijah. Let's review that before we pick up the verses in which we read. To Adonijah, at the end of chapter 1, we saw that he was dismissed from Solomon's presence, told to go back to his own house. Where did Adonijah first run when he heard the noise of the celebration of Solomon's coronation? That's right, he ran to the dwelling place of God. Where specifically? What did he grab hold of? Okay, so chapter 1, verse 50, he went and took hold of the horns of the altar. Solomon heard, and Solomon dismissed him to his house. Chapter 2 comes, and we see Adonijah go to a certain woman, that's right, Bathsheba, to make a request. What request did he make of her in order that she make a request of Solomon?
He wanted to marry.
And he got the young damsel who kept son of David warm to be his wife.
That's right, okay? So there's Abishag, the woman that they found, the young woman, the young beautiful woman that they found for David, that they wanted, he asked that she be given to him, Adonijah, as a wife. Yes.
My brother, before you proceed, this is just a thought that I had when I was looking at it. Now, take into consideration that we studied before, Ahithophel giving his brother, Absalom, information about exposing the king David's concubines, without Israel seeing this. Now, this might not seem to be the same thing, but if we look through the proper lens, we will see that he is actually, this is basically the same situation.
That's right.
But it might not be as out and out as it, but quietly,
Yes.
it was basically the same thing. And I believe that Solomon, being wise, understood all these things.
That's right.
And why should he let this Absalom embarrass his father? And he's saying to himself, I saved your life once. You're not going to embarrass my father just like Absalom did.
That's right.
Therefore, that's why he executed him.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. He was doing exactly like Absalom did. So Absalom did it flagrantly in the sight of all of Israel, and Adonijah was trying to do it more subtly. And so what we said is, of course, the author said he was born after Absalom as a sort of play on words. Chronologically, he was after Absalom, but he's also after the pattern of Absalom. And also, what we noticed in the author presenting things this way is that he follows Absalom in the same destination. Do you remember what God said to David in 2 Samuel chapter 12 when he was confronted?
With Bathsheba, he gave, he was forgiven, right?
So when David, that's right, he did tell David he was forgiven. Remember, the prophet comes and speaks to him, Nathan, right? And Nathan rebukes David for his sin. What was David's response?
At first, because of the way Nathan presented it to him, David thought it was just that the man in the parable had been punished.
Okay.
David said, that's you.
That's right. I am not sure if we said this last week, but I'll read it for you. 2 Samuel chapter 12. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 5. Then David's anger burned greatly against the man in the parable, and he said to Nathan, as Yahweh lives, surely the man who has done this deserves to die. He must make restitution for the lamb. Who sees it? Fourfold. Because he did this thing and had no compassion. So the man who did this must make restitution fourfold. So the parable that Nathan said was the killing of the lamb that was in David's sin. He took Bathsheba from Uriah and had Uriah put to death. Okay, so David's sin was the death of Uriah, one man. David, by his own confession, said this man must make restitution fourfold. And so what we saw in the life of David was the loss of these 4 sons. Who remembers? Absalom? Well, right after, in the same chapter, 2 Samuel chapter 12, there's the unnamed child that dies. Right? So there's the unnamed child that dies. Then Absalom kills Amnon. And then Absalom himself is strangled by his hair and he dies. And now Adonijah. So the 4 children, 4 sons of David, 3 named, 1 unnamed, have died as a result because the Lord said to David, the sword shall not depart from your house. And so we see here the end, the fourfold, the 4th son of David dying. And in fact, it's Solomon who brings about this final execution. Now, what our brother Norman was saying, to make our connection back to 1 Kings, this is Adonijah following in the footsteps of Absalom. Absalom, and here Adonijah in our main text, he is acting in a crafty fashion. What does that remind us of? The serpent in the garden. So if here Solomon is setting his renewed garden kingdom in order, and he's trying to get rid of the snakes. The first thing he must make sure is to get rid of the one who is acting in a crafty fashion like the serpent. So he makes sure he's perceptive, he's wise. In the next chapter, we're going to make a big deal out of the wisdom, the perceptiveness of Solomon. So Solomon is wise to see the craftiness of the serpent Adonijah. Yes, brother?
I'm sorry to be taking over, but it's amazing that you said that. Because if we turn the page back a little bit, remember when Bathsheba went to her son Solomon, he said to her, if he's coming to ask for that, why don't he ask for the kingdom also?
That's right. That's exactly right.
It was very sarcastic, but
That's
at the
right.
same time, it was Solomon exposing and showing us the wisdom that God had given to him.
That's right. That's right. So Solomon acts better than the man and the woman in the garden who were given dominion. Remember, God gave them dominion in chapter 1, and he put them in the garden, the place where they should rule, and a crafty enemy came in and deceived them. And here Adonijah goes to the woman to ask that certain things be done. Solomon sees through this craftiness and doesn't participate, even though the woman agrees and asks Solomon to do that thing. But she doesn't convince Solomon because Solomon is shrewd, right? He's the positive version of crafty. So there's the same word used in the Old Testament text. It can be used positively, like shrewdness or wisdom, or negatively, like craftiness in scheming. So Solomon shows himself not to be in the pattern of Absalom and Adonijah, going back, tracing the pattern back further, like Saul or even the serpent. So Solomon shows himself to be a different son of David. Okay, so after Adonijah is put to death, notice what Solomon says to him in the concluding verses, 24. Now, therefore, this is 1 Kings chapter 2. Now, verse 24. Now, therefore, as Yahweh lives, who has established me and set me on the throne of David my father, and who has made me a house as he promised, surely Adonijah shall be put to death today. So King Solomon sent Benaiah the son of Jehoiada and fell upon him so that he died. Solomon understands what he is doing to be in keeping with the promises of God. You see that? Solomon understands that it's not any son of David that can fulfill the promise. Have we seen this pattern throughout Scripture before? That the promises given don't necessarily follow or transfer to the oldest of the next generation? Where else have we seen this?
Esau and Jacob.
That's right. We saw it in Esau and Jacob. Esau was the older, but Jacob received the blessing. Where else?
Ishmael.
Okay, we saw in Cain and Abel, certainly.
And an Abel.
What did you say?
Ishmael and Isaac.
Ishmael and Isaac was the first in the series of the patriarchs. Good. Okay, and we saw even in the 12 sons of Jacob, it was not the oldest son who received the prominence. It was the oldest son of the 12 is? The oldest son of the 12 is? Reuben. He receives not the prominence. In the lifetime of the father, it was Joseph and then Benjamin who received the great love of the father. But it's ultimately Judah that comes to rule over his other brothers. So we see in all of the generations of the patriarchs, that is Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and their sons, all three generations of the patriarchs, it's not the oldest son that receives the prominence in his time. What we are watching is Solomon follow that same pattern. It's none of the older sons of David through whom the promises will come to pass. So in Solomon, we see a picture of what the true son of David would look like. And we see that while it requires that he be born biologically of the flesh according to David, it's not sufficient to be born of David. Everybody understand? So the promised Messiah, the anointed one who would come to fulfill God's promises to David, must be born of David according to the flesh. But that's not sufficient because we are seeing man after man descendant from David being disqualified. So Solomon is a picture, he's not the ultimate one, but he's a picture of what the ultimate qualified descendant of David will be. And that's why at the execution of Adonijah, Solomon says in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 24, as Yahweh lives, who established me and set me on the throne of David, my father, and who has made me a house as he promised. So God promised to David that one of your descendants I will sit on the throne. And Solomon says, this was speaking of me. So Solomon is a partial fulfillment of God's promise to David. It's a partial fulfillment in preview. So Solomon does present for us a preview of what that fulfillment will look like. He is not the ultimate fulfillment, though. So let's continue reading. First thing to identify, this is execution number 1 after the death of David. He executes Adonijah. The main takeaway there is Solomon identifies himself and not another son of David as the one through whom the promises will be fulfilled. Next, we see a dismissal. Verse 26, where we began reading, we see the priest Abiathar.
Yes, sir.
Solomon dismisses him. Go to Anathoth, to your own field, for you deserve to die. The translation there, you are a man of death. That means you're what you deserve. That's your ultimate end, is death. But I will not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of the Lord Yahweh before my father David, and because you were afflicted in everything with which my father was afflicted. Here's a tragic execution. Not unjust, or it's not a unjust dismissal, but it is tragic. Here's a man who was faithful to David, endured difficulties with David throughout the great majority, but he failed at the end. He did not have the wisdom to maintain his allegiance to the anointed of God until the end. Here's a man who even suffered along with David, but at the end turned away. There's a warning for us that the one who turns away before the end will be judged of God. And Solomon shows himself to be above sympathy for the evildoer. Even though this wrongdoer who betrayed David did suffer with David, Solomon doesn't fall prey to the temptation of, oh, well, I have to forgive him because of these other considerations. Solomon upholds the righteous standard because that's what's required to rule over this kingdom well. He has received a kingdom from his father according to the promises of God, and he understands this is what's necessary for the just ruling of a kingdom. He has no sympathies for Abiathar. It's a strong warning for us. Be careful lest you fail before the end. That is a tragedy. We've all met, or at least heard stories of those who have served the Lord, and before the end they met with a great failure.
My brother.
Yes, brother.
It's amazing. We're not talking about a soldier. We're talking about a priest.
That's right. That's right.
This makes a lot of difference. Lots of difference.
It makes a big
Not a
difference.
soldier or even a general, a priest,
That's right.
a man who put on the effort.
Mhm. Yes. And in fact, we see a soldier upcoming, and before that we saw a would-be king, right? So we're seeing the king, we're seeing the soldier, and we're seeing here a priest. So there's no differentiation in the eyes of the Lord. No man receives any priority in the eyes of God. Absolutely correct. Final verse of relating to Abiathar, verse 27. This was to fulfill the word of Yahweh which he had spoken concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh. Who knows the reference to where this is given, where this promise is given?
1 Samuel 2, verse 31 to 35.
Okay, all right.
She's just too sharp.
Yeah, we knew. I shouldn't have said who knows. I should have just asked where it is, okay? So, 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 27 to 36. Now, we don't have the time to investigate that fully. Let me make a few important notes concerning that. This comes at from the man of God who came to speak to Eli. He says to Eli concerning the decline of the house of Eli. Remember what we saw in the book of Samuel. the decline of those who were exalted and the exaltation of those who were lowly. Right? So let's turn and make a few notes here from 1 Samuel chapter 2. Because just as we saw Solomon acting in order to fulfill the promises given to David in the execution of Adonijah, now we see Solomon acting to fulfill the promises given to Eli in the dismissal of Abiathar. So this is 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 27 says, "A man of God came to Eli and said to him, Thus says Yahweh, did I not indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in bondage in Pharaoh's house? Did I not choose them from all the tribes of Israel to be my priests, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, to carry an ephod before me? Did I not give to the house of your father all the fire offerings of the sons of Israel? Why do you kick at my sacrifices and my offering, which I have commanded in my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by making yourselves fat with the choicest of every offering of my people Israel? Therefore, Yahweh, God of Israel, declares, I did indeed say that your house and the house of your father should walk before me forever. But now, Yahweh declares, far be it from me. You can underline this. For those who honor me, I will honor. And those who despise me will be lightly esteemed. Behold, days are coming when I will break the strength and the strength of your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house. You will see the distress of my dwelling, in spite of all the good that I do for Israel, and an old man will not be in your house forever. Yet I will not cut off every man of yours from my altar, so that your eyes will fail from weeping, and your soul grieve, and all the increase of your house will die in the prime of life. This will be the sign to you which will come concerning your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. On the same day, both of them will die. Verse 35. But I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will do according to what is in my heart and my soul, and I will build him an enduring house, and he will walk before my anointed always. Verse 36, everyone who is left in your house will come and bow down to him for a piece of silver, or a loaf of bread, and say, please assign me to one of the priest's offices, so that I may eat a piece of bread. Now, the significance of these things, God arrives sending a man of God to Eli and says, this is what's happening. Your sons have dishonored me by taking the choice portions of the sacrifices that are meant to come to me, and they've made yourselves fat. He says, the Lord says, you've made yourselves, that means including Eli, with his sons. You've made yourselves fat. And God says, I made a promise to your fathers. Now, which fathers is he talking about? Aaron, that's right, the tribe of Levi. So he says, I chose your tribe, the tribe of Levi, to minister before me forever. That was the promise to the tribe of Levi. You will be ministers before me forever. And God says here, I will not put up with this. I won't be dishonored by the one who esteems me lightly. And so he's dismissing them. Now, the lineage I want you to trace are the 4 sons of Aaron. 2 of them we read of in Numbers chapter 10. What happens to Leviticus chapter 10. What happens to the sons?
They offered an offer
They
that
offered
was
the
not the will of God.
That's right. They
They were killed.
offered the strange fire. These 2 sons were? Nadab and Abihu. Okay, they offered the strange fire before the Lord. Nadab and Abihu. Okay. The sons here, who acted like them dishonorably, are Hophni and Phinehas. But Nadab and Abihu. Aaron had 2 more sons. Extra credit if you get this one. What were the 2 other sons?
Phineas.
Yeah, Phineas.
Okay, Phinehas is one of them. Actually, it's not Phinehas. Phinehas is not one of them. Phinehas is the grandson.
Okay.
You know what he
Got
did?
me there.
Okay.
I forgot.
Okay. It's okay. Next time I ask you, you guys will know the answer. So Nadab and Abihu, then Ithamar and Eleazar.
Eleazar, yes.
Ithamar and Eleazar. Ithamar and Eleazar. The son of Eleazar was Phinehas.
Phineas,
Okay.
okay.
So God made a promise to the house of Levi through Aaron. Your house will minister before my presence forever. Well, he's already excluded the two oldest sons. Nadab and Abihu have been dismissed. So the remaining ones are Ithamar and Eleazar. In Numbers chapter 25, we see one of those sons act rightly before the Lord. That's Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, who acts rightly, and God says, I will establish my eternal covenant with you. That's Numbers chapter 25. Now, what we are watching here in the book of Samuel, Samuel and his sons are of the house of Ithamar. Samuel and his sons are of the house of Ithamar, and concerning 1 Kings chapter 2, Abiathar is of the house of Ithamar along with Eli and his sons. So Abiathar, along with Eli and his sons, were descendants of Ithamar. So God, in dismissing, in the days of Eli, he made the promise that his household will diminish. Not the household of Levi, not the household of Aaron, but the line of Eli's household connected to Ithamar will diminish. What we see here in the dismissal of Abiathar is the final dismissal of the house of Ithamar. That leaves one son of Aaron to fulfill the purpose given to the Levites. Okay? Now, as we go forward in the book of Kings, I want you to carry part of the promise from 1 Samuel chapter 2. So write this down for your notes, what's important in 1 Samuel chapter 2. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 35. And this language should strike you as sounding so similar to the promise given to David. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 35. But I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will do according to what is in my heart and my soul. And he says, I will build him an enduring house. You hear all of the echoes to the promise to David, but notice this last line. He will walk before me always. Is that what it says? No, it says he will walk before my anointed always. So there is a priest, not of the line of Nadab and Abihu, not of the line of Ithamar, but of the house of Eleazar, which will walk before Yahweh's anointed forever. We know it's not Abiathar, because it says he will walk before my anointed forever, and he's being dismissed. So even here in 1 Kings chapter 2, the dismissal of Abiathar and the house of Ithamar is coming to pass. But God says he's going to raise up someone to walk before his anointed forever. So the question, which the book of Kings will begin to make us ask and give us hints at the fulfillment, is who is this one who is going to walk before his anointed forever? Don't answer yet. It's a complicated question. God is going to raise up somebody of the house of Eleazar through the promise made to Phinehas and through the negative promise made to Eli. God is going to raise up somebody who will always walk before his anointed. That means coinciding with the promised descendant of David, there will be a promised descendant of Eleazar and Phinehas who will walk before David's descendant forever. There's a promised descendant to David, and there's a promised descendant to the house of Eleazar. And we know they won't be the same person because he says he will walk before my anointed. So think about it. We'll discuss it in upcoming studies, who this fulfillment is. But for now, what Solomon is doing in dismissing Abiathar is fulfilling the part of the promise concerning what the Lord said to Eli, that your house I will remove from me forever, right? Okay. So the dismissal of Abiathar is the beginning of the fulfillment against the house of Eli. So the question we should be asking is, who's going to be ministering? Abiathar was removed. Somebody has to do that job, right? So we'll see that in the upcoming sections of 1 Kings. Right now we see the beginning of that fulfillment. Now verse 28, back to 1 Kings chapter 2. We'll go a little bit more quickly because we've seen some of these elements before. We read, news came to Joab. Isn't it funny how news seems to be showing up? And the same thing in chapter 1, someone came to bring the news to Adonijah. And Adonijah said, you're a valiant man, so you must be coming with good news.
Good tidings.
Yeah. It seems that news has a way of arriving. Joab hears the news about the death of Adonijah, and he didn't follow Absalom, but he did follow Adonijah. Here's another warning. Just like Abiathar, who failed just before the end, Joab doesn't fall for every wrong decision, but he did fail in one major wrong decision. Many, actually, but we see that it doesn't matter if you get some choices right. In your standing before the Lord and before his anointed, you cannot rely upon past correct actions to deliver you from your failed wrong decisions.
You must follow the Lord with your whole heart.
That's right. That's right. Now, when Joab hears, he responds exactly the way Adonijah did. Okay, so this raises some interesting question. Doesn't he know what happened to Adonijah? Did he not receive that part of the news? Because he did the same thing Adonijah did. But that forced me to think, why are they doing this? Why did they both flee to the altar and grab the horns of the altar? Anybody have any ideas why they thought to do this?
Possibly they're thinking that Solomon understood.
Maybe they thought they would obtain mercy if they were in temple.
And therefore he would actually show mercy.
Yeah, the same seem to be saying that maybe it's a place where they expect mercy. If the king sees, okay, they fled there, they're expecting to receive some mercy there. After all, it was on the altar that offerings for forgiveness were made. Perhaps the king will take this as a sign of repentance, or at least a call for mercy. I want you to read with me. You can just listen if you don't want to turn there. It's Exodus chapter 21. This is just at the beginning of the giving of the law. Exodus chapter 21, verses 12 through 14 reads like this. So they should have known better. This is what it reads. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hands, then I will appoint you a place to which he may flee. If, however, a man acts presumptuously toward his neighbor so as to kill him by deceit, you shall take him even from my altar, that he may die. So God seems to be here making provision for the priest. If somebody who's supposed to be at the altar, he says, even if he's at the altar, you take him away if he acted deceitfully. If it was an accidental killing, that's what God says, but God let him fall into his hand. If God caused an accidental death and somebody was involved, God will appoint a place to flee. We know what those are called, right? We heard in the law about the cities of refuge. Yeah, that's the most common translation. The cities of refuge. But here, God says if he acted presumptuously, if he acted in deceit, then even if he goes to the altar, or even if he's at the altar like a priest should be, you shall take him from there and kill him. So the altar, according to God's law, is not a place of protection for the guilty. God has made protections and provision for the innocent, for the one who wants to have a trial, for the one who wants to be judged according to God's law. There is a place to go. But for the wicked who acts deceitfully, the one who lies in wait, there is no protection at the altar. Now, which category does Joab fall into? Joab is deceitful and wicked and cunning. Yes.
Which verse is that?
I was reading from Exodus 21, verse 12 through 14. Okay, so Joab killed 2 men in deceit, right? And Solomon names them, the 2 men. And these were both men that David was going to bring to himself. In fact, Abner was on his way and had eaten with David and was going to go back to Israel to bring the tribes of Israel to allegiance to David. And Joab deceived him, took him aside, and he spilled his stomach out, it says. Right? So by deceit, he killed him. The next man, Amasa, while Amasa was going out on an errand for David, Joab met him, and with a hidden sword, he pierced him through. So Joab, by deceit, killed 2 men. And David rebuked him in word at that time. And David spoke to Solomon before his departure, saying, "You will know what to do." Yes, brother.
Remember also that David, he wept.
Yes.
Abner was
That's
slain.
right, he did. Yes, he wept for the death of Abner because he understood Abner was one who, though he fought some battles initially, he was going to bring allegiance to David. And he said he was a noble man. So David gave him his stamp of approval. Now notice, Solomon is not the first to act here. Joab just hears the news and he flees to the altar. And Solomon sends to bring him out. He sends Benaiah, who is the army commander who is in Joab's former place. Right? Joab himself has been dismissed, first by Amasa. David puts Amasa in his place. And now by Benaiah, who Solomon sets in his place. So Solomon calls him to come out. And what is Joab's response?
No, he won't come out.
He says, "No, for I will die here."
Die here.
So Solomon takes him up on his prediction and says, "Go. Do to him exactly what he said," is Solomon's response. Go and fall on him. Of significance here is what Solomon says is the significance of these things. Let's listen to what Solomon had to say. He had something important to say concerning the death of Adonijah. He had something to say concerning the dismissal of Abiathar. Now he has something to say concerning the execution of Joab. Verse 33, we're jumping into the middle of Solomon's speech. Verse 33 says, "So shall their blood, the blood of those who were deceived and tricked, shall be on the head of Joab and the head of his seed," or his descendants. Isn't that an important word for us? The blood of the slain will be on Joab and upon his descendants forever. But to David and his descendants, or his seed, and his house and his throne. You see the intensification on that? To David's seed forever. Seed, his house, his throne. May there be peace from Yahweh forever. Joab was one who brought chaos. Remember, it was Joab who thought to do something to bring Absalom back after David had put him outside the city. He contrived to bring Absalom back, and David, feeling soft of heart, or weak at least of heart that day, received him back. Joab brought a lot of bloodshed. Joab was the one who obeyed David's sinful command to send Uriah to the front. Joab is a man of war. He's a man of hostility. He's a man of blood. So in the rejection, indeed the execution of Joab, Solomon is saying, to you who act wickedly will come all the consequences and the curse. Solomon is bringing to bear the curses which Joab's actions deserve. And he says, contrary to this, God has promised something different for the house of David. Even though Joab was with David for so many of these acts, it's the house of Joab that will receive curses, but God says for David, because of the promises God made to him, David's house will receive peace forever. So this is an important thing, because right here what Solomon is saying has to be fulfilled at some point. Okay, it has to be fulfilled, because he said, but to David and his descendants and his house and his throne may there be peace from Yahweh forever. When Solomon invokes this promise, the difficulty is, as we go through the book of Kings, we're going to see the exact opposite. The book of Kings is not a book of peace. In the book of Kings, exactly what it says, the descendants of David, his house, and his throne. The descendants, the house, and the throne are not in for peaceful times after chapter 11. From now until 1 Kings chapter 11, there will be peace. So the reign of Solomon is a picture of what this fulfillment will look like. But here he says, forever. Peace from Yahweh forever. And what we find after the passing of Solomon, it is more tumultuous than even in the days of Joab. So here Solomon sets up the expectation that what we are seeing him do here will be done in a greater and more complete fashion in a time to come. So we understand that the author, this is important, not just us, but the author of 1 Kings expects us to understand that there is a coming son of David who will be greater than Solomon. You understand the importance of that? It's not that he wrote the stories, oh, Solomon was such a great king, and then we are saying there's going to be somebody even greater. The author of the stories of the life of Solomon says, even we who are living in history after the events of these things, we look at Solomon and say, somebody is coming of the line of David who will be like Solomon, but even greater, in fact, who will be the full completion of all the things we began to see in Solomon. So this is not a New Testament expectation that there is a greater son of David than Solomon. It is an Old Testament expectation. It's fulfilled in the New Testament at the arrival of Jesus, but it's not invented by the New Testament. Everybody know the significance of that? So when we are reading the Old Testament scriptures themselves expect a greater son of David than Solomon. And so by Solomon's own words, there is one who is coming to inhabit the house of David, to sit on the throne of David, one who is a seed of David, who will bring all these things to full completion, what we are seeing in Solomon.
He announced that greater than Solomon is here.
When Jesus came, he said, a greater than Solomon is here. Okay, so that's significant, okay? So Solomon had something to say at the execution of Adonijah, at the dismissal of Abiathar, and at the execution of Joab. Finally, for our considerations tonight before we go to prayer, there's one more man, Shimei. Who was this man?
One who cursed David.
Oh, when David...
That's one who cursed
That's
David.
right. When David was fleeing from Absalom, he crossed which river? That's right. He crossed, at that time, the brook. It was a trickling brook, the Kidron. This is significant for the New Testament. If you read the Lord Jesus before his arrest to go to crucifixion, he crosses the Kidron. But here also, Solomon says to Shimei, I'm not going to kill you, but here's the conditions upon which you may live. What does he say?
Take the house and stay in Jerusalem and don't leave.
Go to your house and don't leave.
Period. House arrest.
Okay. When he leaves and goes to Gath. What we are watching in Shimei is a repeat of the Saul and David incident. David fled from Saul from Jerusalem in the from the capital where Saul was in Judah to Gath. You remember? At that time, the author wrote, David, the servant of Saul, fled to Gath. We are watching here Shimei occupy the place of Saul. Solomon said to him, stay at your house in Jerusalem. He leaves to pursue his servants. You remember, when David fled to Gath, Saul went to pursue him. So we're seeing Shimei go to pursue fleeing servants who had gone to Gath. So we are watching in him a return of Saul-like behavior. And Solomon finds out about this, verse 43, why then have you not kept the oath of Yahweh, the commandment which I have laid on you? You know, verse 44, all the evil which you acknowledge in your heart, which you did to my father David. Therefore Yahweh shall return your evil on your own head. Verse 45, but King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before Yahweh forever. The significance of this is we are seeing in Solomon and David the fulfillment of what God said to Abraham from the beginning. He said to Abraham, he said it to Israel, and he said it to David. The one who blesses you, I will bless. And the one who curses you, I will curse. So Solomon says to Shimei, you were a curser. You cursed David as he was on the run. So you, Yahweh is bringing the curses upon you. You were a speaker of curses, especially against David. Because you cursed God's anointed, God is visiting curses upon you. Also, but King Solomon, verse 45, shall be blessed. And the throne of David shall be blessed before Yahweh forever. So Solomon says, blessing is upon Solomon and David's throne. So he's saying he's one who is treating David well. Just as Shimei cursed and treated David wrongly, he's saying, Solomon, me, I'm treating David well, so the blessing is coming to him according to God's promises. So we see Solomon's own understanding of the significance of these 3 executions and this 1 dismissal. This is Solomon's understanding of these things. And the author, in verse 46, summarizes all of these things for us. So the king commanded Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he went out and fell upon him so that he died. Thus, the kingdom was established in the hands of Solomon. So Solomon rids the land, rids the kingdom of these would-be serpents, executions and dismissal. And he speaks at each one of them what his own understanding is the significance of these things. All that God has promised for good, like to David, or evil, like to Eli, Solomon sees himself as the one who is bringing these things to pass. Solomon, as God's chosen king, is the one through whom the purposes of God are accomplished. Everybody understand how Solomon is understanding himself? And everybody understand how the author of this book is understanding these things? Any thoughts or questions on the things we've looked at?
So, Zadok the priest was put in place of Abiathar.
All right, Sister Greta is giving us the answer for studies in the future. There's somebody who is put in the place of Abiathar, and we're going to have much to say about him in the upcoming chapters. The one who is made to minister before the Lord in place of the dismissed Abiathar is Zadok the priest. We'll have much to say. You can read ahead and make your thoughts ready for when we get there. Okay? Brother Kirk, you were saying?
Yes, Jesus mentioned him in Mark chapter
Mm.
when the disciples, I think they brought the corn. And, Jesus said, didn't have you read in the days of Abiathar the priest?
That's right.
When David was hungry. And we know from 1 Samuel chapter 21, it was Elimelech who was the priest.
Mhm.
But some people feel like, like somebody might do something to you and you refer to them as Judas. And, Jesus was, maybe sarcastic because Abiathar, he was with David, he honored the father,
Mhm.
but he didn't honor the son.
Yeah.
He didn't honor Solomon.
Mhm.
So Jesus was saying the same thing to them. You honor the father,
Yeah.
but you not honor the son.
Yeah.
And Abiathar, he was thrust out. And that brings us back to Samuel, I think it was chapter 1, and with Eli's sons. God, he came from that line.
Yeah.
And so the word being fulfilled, what God said would happen. And it went over to the other line, which is Zeta.
Yeah. So, what Brother Kirk is saying is very significant. In fact, what he's saying about he was thrust out, right? My translation says dismissed. The literal translation, or the one we're familiar from other places, is to drive out. And many of those who were cut off from the line of blessing are said to be driven out. Ishmael is driven out. Remember, he was formerly connected to the lineage of blessing. He was driven out. Esau and his descendants are said to be driven out. He was formerly connected to the line of blessing, but driven out. In the same way, what we are seeing in Abiathar, formerly connected to the place of blessing, that is to bear the blessing of ministering in the presence of God, but he is driven out. All of this, of course, goes back to Genesis 3, when they are driven out from the garden. Okay, so what our brother is saying of Abiathar, he was driven out from the priesthood, so also is the consequence that fell to those who were cut off from the blessing of God. Perhaps as thoughts and application, we can consider for ourselves how important it is to make our allegiance to the correct son. Not to the competing sons of David, not to Adonijah, not to Absalom, not to any other competitors, but we must make homage, or we must bow down. Psalm 2 says, kiss the Son. We must have a right relationship to the Son. All of these men failed in their relationship to the figured son of David, to Solomon. The application for us is we all must have a right relationship to the Son. So let's commit ourselves to these things in the days to come, to have a right obedience, honor for the Son.
So Simon.
Yes, sister.
Was Zadok descendant of Eleazar?
Yes, Zadok is of the line of Eleazar and Phinehas, through whom God made a covenant, Numbers 25.
Okay.
So that's in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 35. The king appointed Zadok the priest in the place of Abiathar.